Hello and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest MEED webinar and the final one of the year. And this month we're talking about two very recent and very exciting developments in Saudi Arabia. The likely chance for Saudi Arabia to be hosting the FIFA World Cup in 2034, and also the very recent announcement that it has been selected to host the World Expo in Riyadh in 2030. My name is Edward James. I'm the head of content and research at MEED, and today during the webinar jointly is my colleague, MEED's editor, Colin Foreman, and together we'll be going over the projects, the likely projects coming out as a result of these two events. Clearly, there's going to be a lot of work coming up in Riyadh, adding to the amount of work that there is already, of course. So the two events are going to offer a lot of opportunities, and this is what we'll be going through today. Of course, at the end of this presentation, as usual, we will be taking your questions. So if you do have any questions or comments, please submit those into the Q&A box, and we will answer them hopefully at the end between us. So we normally get more than 100 questions, so please make sure if you do have any to put them in as soon as the session, the webinar itself presentation is over. As usual, this presentation is being recorded, so you will be able to watch it again in your own time. It'll be uploaded to YouTube. You'll also be able to find it on the meed.com website. And as we speak, over the next 10-15 minutes or so, you should get a copy in your inbox of this presentation itself in PDF format. So you again will be able to look at it in your own time and or share with your friends and colleagues. Okay, so without further ado, let's move on. And just before we do look at the presentation itself, just wanted to highlight to everyone that this webinar is being coordinated with our latest premium report on the subject of the 2034 World Cup and the 2030 Expo and some of the projects that are going to come up. Of course, it's still early days for both events, but there is quite a deal of information on some of the procurement and associated project opportunities around them. So if you want to know more and get the latest updates on these two very important and pivotal events for the kingdom, then you can get the details here. Scan the QR code, as you can see. And I'm also happy to say that anyone who attends today and listens in, it can get a special discount pre-offer launch and an additional $100 discount as well if you're using the apply code webinar 100. So the report is out at the end of the month, and for those of you early birds, you can purchase it at a reduced price. Now, since I've got you all here on the webinar today, I'd also want to highlight our major event, conference and summit of the year, which is our Saudi Giga Projects 2024 and MENA Construction Summit 2024 events on the 13th to the 14th of May 2024 in Riyadh. And earlier this year, we had our first Saudi Giga Projects event, and we had 7, 8 or 9 of the key Saudi Giga projects talking about their procurement plans, the individual packages coming up. And it was a fantastic chance to network and to get some information, hear what they had to say about the market. So we'll be holding our latest event on this next May, and I'm really excited. It's going to be full of Giga projects, Giga project clients talking about their future plans, including maybe some new ones as they are announced over time. So I hope to look forward and seeing you there. Right, now let's start by looking at the 2034 FIFA World Cup, which Saudi Arabia hasn't yet been officially awarded as the host, but is almost certainly likely to win the rights next summer, as it is the only bidding company and the deadline country, and the only the deadline for submitting bids for the host of the World Cup expired a couple of months ago. So it's more than certain that Saudi Arabia will host. Colin, over to you to go through some of the background for this.
Yeah, I think this is an important thing to talk about, really. I mean, the World Cup bid really came through quite quickly, but it's something that's been building for quite some time. I mean, Saudi Arabia has been talking about developing other sectors of the economy, so there's a lot of noise being made about tourism and industry. And also on top of that, there's a lot more events going on. So there's sort of just general entertainment. So if it's things like music and music festivals, also cinemas opening up. So that's the entertainment side, but then also sport. And I think the sport's two things really. One, it's well, more than two things. It's sport as in an entertainment. So there's that factor to it. I think also it's got a lot of other externalities where it helps improve sort of health and wellness in the kingdom as well, which I think is quite important, and also included in Vision 2030. And then there's this idea of major events as economic drivers and opening up the kingdom to the rest of the world and supporting other sectors such as tourism. So I think sport touches a lot of areas that they're trying to address in the kingdom at the moment. So I think it's important. There have been accusations on some of the other sporting events as well of this idea of sports washing and the sort of investment in sports to try and portray the kingdom in a different light and maybe detract from some of the criticisms that the kingdom gets from other places. Interestingly, they've been addressed directly by the Crown Prince in interviews, and he's been quite open and said, look, the sports boosting GDP, so he's comfortable with that. So that's the sort of background of sports. Football specific, for me, really the story begins with the Newcastle United acquisition, which got held up a little while with the Premier League. The Premier League were a bit resistant to it, over concerns about PIF being a government company or a separate independent company. They then finally said that yes, it's okay. It's not a government entity, and allowed that takeover to happen. So that happened in 2021. Then following that, in 2022, obviously we had the World Cup in Qatar. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman attended. And then, of course, there was the famous day where Saudi Arabia beat Argentina, which I think led to a lot of sort of positive feeling in the kingdom. If I remember correctly, there was a public holiday declared the day after, maybe. So there was a lot of, groundswell of sort of support and enjoyment over that. And then in December that year, so just after the World Cup, there was the Cristiano Ronaldo transfer, which really put the kingdom itself, rather than as an investor in football, put Saudi football on the map. So there was obviously a lot of profile to be gained from that. Very high transfer fee, but the argument is that what Ronaldo brought with him is, one of the biggest followings on Instagram, profile, all that kind of thing. So that introduced a lot of people to Saudi football. Then in June, the PIF invested in 4 Saudi football clubs. Hot on the heels of that, there was a lot of PIF companies then sponsored those football clubs, which boosted their revenues. And the summer we had a few months ago, that Saudi Arabia really was one of the dominant forces in the transfer market for football players over the summer. So perhaps the most high profile was Neymar, moving to Riyadh. So a lot of players moved through. So that brings it up to date till about September this year. Then at the beginning of October, Saudi Arabia said that they're intending to bid for the 2034 World Cup to host it.
This was straight after they'd selected Morocco, Spain, and Portugal for the 2028 World Cup.
So Saudi Arabia said they will bid, then submitted a bid. We then waited from, I think it was something like this, very early October to the 31st of October deadline to see if anybody else would bid. The bid was open to 2 geographies or 2 confederations. It was the Asian Confederation and Oceania. There was an expectation that Australia might bid, but then on the 31st of October, Australia withdrew, put out a statement saying that they weren't intending to bid, which left Saudi Arabia as the only bidder. And that really leaves us where we are today. So Saudi Arabia is the only bidder for that World Cup. And we're looking for FIFA to vote on it in the 4th quarter of next year. In the meantime, there'll be more details come out. There'll be a bid prepared, etc., etc. But rather unusually, there's no one else to bid against. Typically, in these situations, a bidding nation would be up against several other competitors, and in this instance, there's just one bidder competing.
And of course, it's not the only football competition that Saudi Arabia is going to be holding over the next few years.
No, there's several. The one that we'll come on to later is the Asian Cup in 2027, which is a big tournament for countries to compete in. Saudi Arabia is also hosting the FIFA Club World Cup this month, so that's teams, clubs rather than nations, that have won their respective Champions League, as it were, competing for the Club World Cup, which is a tournament which is quite interesting that FIFA is looking to expand. So if Saudi Arabia can prove itself as a good host of that tournament, as that tournament expands, it could be a large tournament that Saudi Arabia is quite heavily involved in the future. Just a little bit of football talk. I think that the interesting thing here is that there is quite a battle going on of who controls global football at the moment. So FIFA is obviously the governing body for world football, but traditionally the powerhouse has been Europe and UEFA, and the Champions League and Euros generates a lot of money. So there's quite a bit of tension, or not necessarily tension, but competing forces between those two organisations as to who really controls football and the money that's derived from it.
Okay, and there's, I believe, also Saudi Arabia are bidding for the 2026 AFC Women's Asian Cup as well, vying against Australia, and I think a decision on that should be made soon. That would even be more pressing in terms of stadium infrastructure. And
I think it's also important just to broaden the conversation a little bit from football. Obviously, in 2034 already, we know Saudi Arabia is hosting the Asian Games. So the interesting thing that's going to come out in the bid document is how they're going to time that with one major athletics event and another football tournament, and then there's other competitions as well. So Formula One and all these things that are going on in the kingdom.
So Formula One going to the Qadiyah racetrack in Riyadh. Golf, of course, and the 2029 Asian Winter Games in Trojana at Nyon. Okay, so lots happening in the sporting market. This is really just this slide is just going over some of the things we've been talking about and which may be fairly familiar to many of you. Now, let's look at the actual projects which are likely to be required, not just for the 2034 World Cup, but also the 2027 AFC Cup and potentially the 2026 Women's AFC Asian Cup. And also, just to add as well, there is actually going to be the under-23 Asian Men's Cup in early 2026. So that's also something that we should bear in mind as well. So there are a number of different new stadium or expanded stadium projects for the World Cup, as you might expect. Most World Cups involve an increase in the capacity of stadiums or new builds, as we saw in Qatar. And Saudi Arabia is no exception. The initial work on the stadiums is being done or being under the responsibility of the Ministry of Sport, and it issued a pre-qualification notice earlier this year for 5 stadiums. 4 of which are going to be expanded, and 1 new build, which will be called the New Riyadh Stadium in the capital. The other 4 projects you can see here, we have the expansion of the Saudi Arabia National Stadium, which is the King Fahd Stadium in Riyadh, to 92,000 seats, and we believe that might be one of the contenders to host the World Cup final. Then we have expansions of the Prince Faisal bin Fahd Stadium in Riyadh to 45,000, the Prince Mohammed bin Fahd Stadium in Dammam to 30,000 seats, and the Prince Saud bin Jalari Stadium in Akhair to 5,000 seats. And then, of course, as we spoke about, the new Riyadh Stadium will be built with 45,000 seats. And the stated budget for that program by the Ministry of Sports is about 10.1 billion riyals, which is about $2.5 billion to $3 billion dollars. On the right-hand side here, you can see the rationale for why Saudi Arabia wants to host or expand the stadiums rather, and host these global events. A lot of it, what Colin's just talked about, making sure that the stadiums themselves have improved facilities as well, allowing them to be able to host other events, not outside of sport, like concerts, wrestling, and so on, and to increase commercialization opportunities as well. So this is under the Ministry of Sports. Pre-qualification was issued in July this year, and submissions were made fairly recently for that. And I believe on one of the stadiums already in Dammam, there's already a tender being issued.
I think the important thing just to say here is it seems like there's an awful lot of events going on, and there are a lot of events going on, and they'll be coming quite thick and fast over the next decade. Why I think that's interesting is twofold. One, it gives Saudi Arabia the opportunity to really get used to holding major events and ease itself into something like the World Cup. So there's, if you will, there's quite a lot of events for them really just to get used to organising the logistics. But from the infrastructure side as well, it also means that the infrastructure is going to be developed in phases. So you're going to have a batch of stadiums that are going to be ready for 2027. And then looking forward, there's going to be another set of stadiums that will be done for 2034. And I think that's important because what we've seen, say, in the Qatar example, was that everything needed to be ready for 2022. And there was that sort of bottleneck that got created. I'm sure there will be time pressures and things and bottlenecks that will happen with the Saudi World Cup. But with these events that are coming through, they're going to be hitting lots of smaller deadlines on the way. So that should, if things go well, smooth out some of those pressures.
Because, of course, I think the 2034 World Cup will have 34, 36 teams in total, whereas the 2027 AFC Cup, Asian Cup, will have only 24. So they have that opportunity to ramp up the number of stadiums, expand them, and, of course, as you say, build that infrastructure. Let's take a look at one of the stadiums. As I mentioned, the King Fahd International Stadium, which is the largest stadium in Saudi Arabia right now. It's considered the national stadium, and is likely to be one of the venues in contention to host the World Cup final. It was built about 25 years ago, and has just recently closed as part of the expansion work. And the aim is to have it increase its capacity to about 92,000 spectators, which will make it one of the obviously one of the largest football stadiums in the world. So that's part of one of the Ministry of Sport projects, as you can see here. The preliminary design was done by Italian architect Schiattarella Associati, and like many of the stadiums in the kingdom, planned populace from the UK, if I'm not mistaken, took over most of the architectural work and has designed most of the planned stadiums in the kingdom. We expect the main contract to expand the stadium to be awarded sometime early next year, and clearly there will be a push to have it finished in time for 2027 initially. On the left-hand side in this column, you can see some of the different aspects of this stadium. We're going to have a 360-degree video board around the front edge of the roof. They'll upgrade the existing fabric roof as well. And clearly there'll have to be some facilities added, such as media sections and VVIP sections in line with FIFA World Cup requirements. Here's a site plan. As you can see, different elements to it: training pitches, futsal pitches. There'll be media and entertainment areas as well. As I mentioned, VVIP and VIP facilities too. And there'll be also an upgrade to the drainage and irrigation systems as well, in line with FIFA standards and, of course, security and safety standards as well. So that's one of the projects. Obviously, there are a few more which are coming up, which we don't have time to go through each of those stadium projects today. But as you saw, there are at least 4 other expansions and one new stadium to be built over the next, to be awarded over the next year or so. Now, talking about that ramping up of infrastructure and facilities, here you can see that part of the World Cup offering is the training facilities for each club, for each nation, sorry. And we have, under the time scale envisaged by the Ministry of Sport, we have 18 training facilities to be completed by 2026, should Saudi Arabia win the AFC Women's Asian Cup, and also for the 2026 AFC under 23 Asian Cup. Then for 2027, we'll have 30 training facilities up and running, and then we'll need 36 team training facilities by 2034, including 2 official referee training sites. And each stadium hosting the World Cup should have 3 training sites under the FIFA regulations. And on the right-hand side, you can see some information data on the training facilities planned for the King Fahd International Stadium, which will give you an idea of the kind of facilities required. And again, this is not something new. We saw that in Qatar as well. Each club, each nation rather, had their own training facility as well. So there'll be investment in that, and of course other associated infrastructure. Colin, now it's emerged that beyond the Ministry of Sports stadium plan, there are also other stadiums which are being announced and likely to be constructed over the next 10 years or so, some of which may also be hosting the 2034 World Cup, but not under the Ministry of Sports, as we said. Could you just go expand a little bit on those?
Yeah, I mean, let's just start on the left. There's a stadium there at Neom, which I think is probably best described as being at sort of concept stage at the moment, which is within the line. But the interesting thing about this stadium is that it's quite high off the ground, as you can see from the image. It just about lets you realise that it's about 300 meters off the ground. So that's a very unusual stadium, and if it's built the way it looks there, that's going to be quite an iconic development for 2034. So that's one that's out there as an idea at the moment. A little bit more advanced, if you look on the right hand side, you've got Jeddah Central, where there's a stadium. Prices have gone in for work on that already, so that's a much more advanced stage than the Neom one, and obviously in a centre of population as well, where you would expect a stadium to be developed. Not pictured here, but there's also the King Abdullah Sports City Stadium, where there's some talk about upgrading that stadium as well. So that's another potential venue for World Cup matches. And then if we look down on the bottom right, there's Qiddiya, which is a sports and entertainment city. So it's not surprising to hear that there's a major stadium there where there's some tendering activity already beginning for that as well. So there are quite a few stadiums outside of the Ministry of Sports portfolio that will potentially be hosting World Cup matches. Just to backtrack a little bit, as part of the bid process that they need to suggest, I think it's a minimum of 14 stadiums, and 4 of them need to be existing stadiums that are upgraded. So there's quite a few upgrades that are potentially out there already on the Ministry of Sport programme. If the King Abdullah Sports City one's included as well, then you're okay in terms of upgrade projects. And then there's quite a lot of new stadium projects that could be developed. Also, for those people that have been in the region for some time, they might remember that there was a King Abdullah Stadiums programme that was being undertaken by Aramco in 2014, which had 11 stadiums. And interestingly, that was 11 stadiums in smaller cities around the kingdom. And if we think about what the World Cup's trying to achieve, it's trying to sort of drive economic growth, as it were, around the kingdom, then they might be looking to host matches in some of the smaller cities to try and stimulate development there.
Yes.
And that programme included stadiums in smaller cities. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of those old plans resurface in a slightly different form.
Okay. So Jeddah Central bids have already been submitted to build that. So that's already moving. And Qiddiya, the tenders have been issued, have they?
Yeah, they're engaging with contractors already.
Okay. All right. So as you can see, 2 renders there look quite sort of advanced image, quite futuristic designs there. obviously Neon one is.
Yeah, and I think this is just going back to the drivers for doing all of this. I mean, those pictures there, that challenges the sort of the global perception of what Saudi Arabia is all about. It positions Saudi Arabia as a modern place where someone goes to have fun and watch football, rather than some of the other perceptions that people might have.
Yeah, so it's really about opening up the kingdom and attracting more tourists and changing the global perception of the kingdom.
Putting it on the, it's one of the most watched events on TV, right? It's a global, putting it really in the world shop window.
Yeah. And we've seen that's worked very well for Qatar.
Yes.
2022 World Cup. So yeah, so very, very exciting. So obviously a lot of work planned there, and with all these World Cups, it's not necessarily about the actual stadium construction itself, but all the associated infrastructure like the roads, the training facilities, the hotel work that will be required, expansion of the airports, and so on. But we're going to touch on that in a second later on, and I'll ask you your opinion on that. And we'll move on now to the Expo, another very exciting event, and something which is likely also to open up Saudi Arabia a bit more to the world. Can you talk us through the background on this one?
Yeah, Expo Saudi Arabia announced that it was going to bid. People that attended Expo 2020 in Dubai, Saudi Arabia made a really big effort with their pavilion there. By a lot of people's reckoning, it was the best pavilion at the Expo. Mohammed bin Salman visited the Expo and said he was very impressed. And shortly after that visit, they said Saudi Arabia was going to bid for 2030. It was going to compete against several people, one of whom was Russia, one of whom was Ukraine. They dropped out of the running, which left an Italian city and a South Korean city.
Roman Busan.
And in the first round of bidding, Saudi Arabia got the votes required and got selected to host the Expo just a few weeks ago. So that's been confirmed. That's absolutely happening. And a major event again for Saudi Arabia. The plot or the master plan was released at a meeting in Paris earlier this year, and it's expected to cost about 7.8 billion to deliver. We know from experience in Dubai that the Expo site's a big undertaking with quite a lot of construction work and also a lot of sort of connections and infrastructure to make that all work and bring all the people in. I think the interesting thing about Expos is the sort of the physical side of it and the projects that come with it, but also it's a very long-term event. So in comparison to some of the sporting events tend to be quite short, whereas an Expo lasts for several months. And what that means is there's a lot more hotel stays and big delegations visiting. So the number of hotel rooms that are needed, or the amount of nights that are stayed for the event is actually greater than some of these big sporting events. So as an economic driver, Expos are quite a powerful event.
Yeah. I mean, and here you can see an initial render that was submitted by Saudi Arabia as part of its candidate dossier to compete for the rights to host the Expo. And you can see it's quite a circular design, quite unlike the Expo, which was in Dubai, which was a sort of triangular.
Yeah, the concept behind it is it's based on longitude for the world. So I think the idea is to put countries based roughly where they would sit on the map on the site. My suspicion is that Saudi Arabia will be placed in the middle of that, which I think is quite a good thing, just to go back to the messaging that Saudi Arabia is trying to put through and put itself at the center as a hub for sort of global trade and commerce. So I think that's probably the message that they're going to be really trying to portray with that song.
And of course, they've already said that they will fund $400 million or so for some of the developing nations' pavilions, so that every nation can participate.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting, because if you just think back to how Expos, the last Expo was delivered in Dubai, there was really quite a number of opportunities handled by different people. So there was an Expo Bureau LLC, which was responsible for the primary facilities. So in the case of Dubai, it was the thematics district, which was basically the concrete apron that the Expo sat on. And then there was some of the key pavilions, the sort of signature pavilions, the theme pavilions. And then the Wasl Plaza, which was the real sort of iconic destination in the middle. But then after that, you had lots of different pavilions that were different countries building their own things, which was a tendering opportunity for companies with an individual country's organisation. At the same time, a lot of the smaller countries that can't afford to do their own pavilion take space in smaller sort of generic buildings to put up exhibition space, and I think that'll be what they're using with that statement, where Saudi Arabia will fund it. So it will be exhibition type rooms that are capable of hosting exhibition space that they'll deliver, and then countries can just turn up with their exhibits.
But as is generally happens in these expos, individual countries procure their own pavilions themselves, whereas the host nation will build the anchor pavilions, and as well as the infrastructure as well. And the client at the moment is the government entity which handled the bid. As you'll see here, is the Royal Commission for Riyadh, sometimes better known as RCRC. But it might not remain the client going on the project going forward.
No, typically what happens is there's a special purpose vehicle which is established just to get the thing running, and there's a strong likelihood that could happen here as well.
Yeah. So we'll know more about that in due course. But although, of course, it's a bit more pressing than the World Cup because it's only 6 years away, and as we saw with the Dubai Expo, these things can take a lot of time, a lot of different countries and projects to coordinate, as well as, of course, the transport infrastructure to serve it.
Yeah, it's a major challenge. I was about to say that it's an immovable deadline, but we know from Dubai with COVID-19 and the pandemic that sometimes movable deadlines can be moved. But yeah, I mean, it's a very hard deadline. Dubai struggled to deliver it on time, and they've got about the same amount of time as Saudi Arabia. So I think it's going to be a real challenge. I think if I'm looking back at Dubai critically, I think there was some time lost between them securing the event at the end of 2013. I think there was a bit of time lost in the sort of 2014-15 period, which maybe it could have been more progress could have been made on site during that time. So perhaps what that means really is the next couple of years for Riyadh are really very important.
We've got to start moving, and that's also important to bear in mind that it's just one of multiple very large projects in Riyadh as well, which will create some bottlenecks, I imagine, in sort of materials and supplies, labor, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, we've reported on World Cups and Expos in the West over the past decade. We're based here in the Middle East, so we've reported on Dubai Expo and we've reported on Qatar World Cup. For me, the massive difference between these events and the Saudi event, if you cast your mind back to when Dubai got Expo, Dubai was really quite a depressed market. It was struggling a little bit post-global financial crisis. And the Expo really revitalized a lot of Dubai and helped it become a more of a buoyant market again. Similarly with Qatar, it was quite a depressed market when they got the rights to host the World Cup. So both of those events were really quite transformative for both markets. For Saudi Arabia, you're already with a very overheated construction market and a lot of things that need to move forward into delivery, and then you're adding 2 more events. So for me, they're the main differences. And then supporting that, Saudi Arabia is a much bigger country. So these events, yes, they're very important and they're big and require a lot of effort. But certainly Dubai is basically just a city, and Qatar is a small country with effectively one city. So it's the impact won't be as great as it was in those other Qatar and Dubai.
Here, I just want to show you all the location, planned location of the expo. As you can see, it's in the north of Riyadh, and if you zoom in, you'll get to see that it covers quite a large area, fairly empty right now. It's just to the north of the Capsark, the university, King Abdullah University there for science. And it's also just to the north of Princess Noura bint Abdurrahman University. And you'll see just above that is the King Khalid International Airport, which will become the King Salman International Airport as one of the big giga projects coming up in Saudi Arabia. Now, there is at the moment, you'll see on the left-hand side of the red triangle area, there is a metro line already running alongside it. But however, there is no station as yet connecting that land with the metro. So more than likely, there will have to be a dedicated metro interchange, metro station built there. But as you can see, it's not very far from the airport. So for international tourists coming in, for example, visitors, it will be fairly straightforward to reach. And interestingly, Colin, it sits very close to a number of new developments, the King Salman International Airport just being one of them, and including what we call the North Pole, probably not far away, New Maraba, and then Diriyah, and then of course Qiddiya, where one of the stadiums will be. So there's this Q Express project, which could well be a component of the expo as well. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a railway line that's connecting the airport to Qiddiya, to try and move people quite quickly across Riyadh and out to Qiddiya. I think it's obviously running past the expo site. I think that, and also there'll be all sorts of other bits of transport infrastructure that will need to be connected. So if we use Dubai just as a reference point, there was a metro link, and in this case, it's slightly different. In Dubai, it terminated at the expo site, whereas this, the expo site in Riyadh is close to the airport already. So I think it's going to need to do two things. It's going to need to bring people directly from the airport, but also it's going to need to bring people from downtown Riyadh or wherever they're staying in Riyadh out to the expo site as well. So I think that's going to be the key driver for any metro link that's there. On top of that, there'll be some road infrastructure. As you said, the site at the moment's pretty empty, and there's not any roads linking into it. So there'll need to be intersections and things connecting into the site. And I know that we're talking a lot about, you know, the future of transport and cars, not necessarily as much as they used to be, but if a large part of these expo sites is car parking as well. So there'll need to be a large area for that to be.
Yes, I remember Dubai Expo has still does have huge car parks to accommodate everyone.
Yeah, and they sort of form part of the master plan, don't they? So it's an area where you can earmark it for future development that can be used after the event. It's just land that's been graded and can be developed at a later date. So it serves two purposes. But I think road transport will still be quite important.
And of course, other associated projects, stormwater, drainage will be necessary, I assume. And it's more than likely the expo will be completely sustainable. So presumably there'll be a lot of renewable energy facilities required to run it and deal with the capacity required.
And going back to my comments on sort of 2014, 2015, these not so glamorous under the ground things that you tend not to notice are the things that you really need to get going early on, because if you leave that too late, then there's a lot of challenges later on.
Well, you can't build anything above ground without everything under the utilities and everything being sorted out. And you can see here on the map on the right hand side, you can see where the expo site is in relation to the metro map. And as you can see, there's no station there at the moment. And just staying on the Riyadh Metro, of course, it's not quite open yet. Any of you who travels to Riyadh will see that most of the structure is there, and you can see some test trains running, and we expect that the metro will be opened over the next year or so. But they're actually already also expanding 2 lines there already, if I'm not mistaken. So there's going to be other transport projects too. One of which, of course, is this King Salman International Airport, the world's largest, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that's the intention. Aiming for 150 million and then, 120 million and then beyond. Yeah, very large project. I think it's going to be incredibly challenging to deliver a 120 million passenger airport by 2030. But that's the time frame they have.
But of course, in very close proximity to the expo site. This is built on the King Khalid International Airport already there. So there'll be a lot of work around the expo site and to the north of Riyadh as well, potentially looking at New Maraba, North Pole projects. And of course, when you're looking at Riyadh, you've got the giga projects Diriyah, Qiddiya, King Salman Park, Riyadh Sports Boulevard, Roshan, so and potentially more. So there's going to be a huge amount of activity in Riyadh itself. Do you think the city will be able to absorb all that work?
It's incredibly difficult. I mean, I would say that Riyadh, in terms of a city, will be arguably the busiest city in the world in terms of new build and construction activity over the next decade. That brings with it a whole host of challenges, whether it be resource in terms of material, equipment, manpower, financial is a major challenge.
Housing, schooling.
And then, you've got all the growing pains that go with it, traffic, inflation. So it's going to be a major undertaking for the next decade.
So basically the world's construction hub, effectively, in terms of a city location.
Yeah.
Just to reiterate, of course, that Saudi Arabia has about $1.4 trillion of known projects in the pipeline. Of course, projects like Neom, Jeddah Central, and the others we've seen today. So Red Sea Global. So kingdom-wide is one of the world's most active construction markets right now. Okay, so let's go to the poll before we start our Q&A. The question will come up now. Should be interesting to hear your answers. Here we are. Which of the two events we looked at today do you think offer the best opportunity for your company? Is it the World Cup or is it the World Expo? Let's have a look. You can vote, please. Okay. See the results. Interesting. Very interesting. So just under 2/3 of you believe that the World Expo will offer the best opportunity, whereas the World Cup is about 1/3 of you believes that will offer the best opportunity for your business. Of course, the World Expo happening first, so maybe also that's a key focus of people's minds.
I would have predicted that the other way round. However, I can understand why the votes turned out the way it was.
Yeah. Right, just before we go into the Q&A, I see we've got already 15 questions, but just to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, so you will have the opportunity to watch in your own time, and you should have already received in your inbox this presentation itself in PDF. But please start to submit your questions in the Q&A box, and Colin and I will attempt to answer them. Just try to.
Okay.
Go to the next slide. Just before we start, just to remind everyone that this was just a preview or just a taster for some of the information and data that you can find in our forthcoming premium report, the World Cup Expo projects report, when we're looking at all the different stadium packages and associated infrastructure as part of the 2034 World Cup, as well as looking at some of the opportunities likely to come up in the 2030 Expo as well. If you want more details on that, please scan the QR code, and also you will note that you can benefit from a special offer for those of you who buy the report before the 25th of December. And finally, again, just one more reminder, we've got our Giga Projects and MENA Construction Summit events in Riyadh on the 13th to 14th of May. I'll be there, Colin will be there. It's going to be the event for anyone interested in Giga Projects or in the MENA construction industry in general, to meet with some of the Giga Project owners, to hear from them directly about their project plans, and to meet with some of the highest level decision makers in the projects market in the region. So 13th to 14th of May, put it in your diaries. That is something that is going to really set, I think, the gold standard for projects, data and information and networking in the region. Right, final question before the Q&A. If you could just answer that, please. Which of these products would you like to receive more information, if any? MEED.com, MEED projects, our reports, including this latest report, and or the Saudi Giga Projects and MENA Construction Summit 2024, which I just mentioned. So if you could just fill that out, and then we'll move on to the questions. And if we could just see the results, please. Okay, thank you very much. All right, now the Q&A. Colin.
Okay, first question, when are the projects going to be awarded? I think that's a multi-level answer, but I think there's going to be a string of stadiums, new construction contracts and upgrade contracts for the Asian Cup 2027. They'll be first on the agenda. Then there will be contracts that are awarded for other stadiums that are planned for the World Cup in the years leading up to 2034. So working backwards, they will really need to be awarded ideally by 2030. So I would say between 2027 and 2030, you'll see that any other stadiums that they're looking to awarding in those 3 years. For the Expo, if we use Dubai as a guide for a rough, the main contracts for that, so the thematic districts and Wasl Plaza were awarded in 2017, and they were meant to be ready for 2018. So I would say take 3 years. So 2027 would be when you'd see the large construction contracts, ideally a little bit early. I think from experience in Dubai, that timeline was a little bit tight. So I would say 2016 to 2027. And then once they're awarded, you will get all the smaller pavilions and things over, say 2027 and 2028. Moving on to another question, which is a good question, and I was remiss to not remember to include this. Saudi Arabia is looking at bringing the IPL, the Indian Premier League cricket, to the kingdom. There's been some talk of investment there, and obviously that's a major sporting event with a huge following. So I think that's another important one to talk about, and brings with it a lot of other challenges in terms of facilities and infrastructure. So yes, that's a good question.
Yeah, I'm sure there'll be plenty of other sporting events which Saudi Arabia will be trying to host.
Yeah, which
across different sports.
Leads into the next question, which we touched on a little bit, which it says chances are that it will be another Winter World Cup, won't it? From a climate point of view, yes. Although I think some of those pressures aren't quite as acute as they were in Qatar, given that some parts of Saudi Arabia does have a little bit more of a favourable climate. However, there's also the Asian Games that year as well, so trying to fit that all in will be quite difficult. So yes, I think it will be in cooler months, but how they thread that needle, we need to wait and see.
Of course, bearing in mind that the 2029 Asian Winter Games will be held in
Yes.
Trojana at altitude in 2029 as well. So I also don't see any talk like we did with Qatar about air-conditioned stadiums or anything like that. So I think it's been agreed with a precedent set by Qatar that it will be over the winter months and therefore not such a critical issue. Obviously, Riyadh a bit drier. That means Saudi Arabia generally a lot drier humidity-wise than say the Gulf Coast.
Yeah. I think this is another important question. With the example of the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy in Qatar for FIFA 2022, KSA announced plans to set up a local organising committee. They haven't done yet, but the expectation is that they will. Apparently for the World Cup in Russia, there wasn't a centralised agency formed, and it was just done directly by the government. My expectation is that Qatar will follow the same model. Saudi Arabia will follow the same model as Qatar. I think just on the subject of Qatar and Russia, I think it's quite interesting that we've got those two World Cups in recent history, because I think in many ways the Saudi World Cup will be similar to Qatar, obviously proximity and climate and those things. But then at the same time, Saudi Arabia is a very big country. So in some ways it will be like the Russian World Cup. So there'll be multiple cities. And then if you remember in the Russian World Cup, for example, you've got free rail travel to get around the country in between games and things. So I think it's an opportunity for Saudi Arabia really to showcase the whole country as much as possible.
Potentially invest in high-speed, long-distance rail as well, or maybe one of the reasons why they're introducing new airlines into the kingdom.
Yeah, all of that will be needed. Any of the Ministry of Sports stadiums being developed as PPPs? Not to my knowledge.
No. Of course, bear in mind that spectator numbers in Saudi Arabia average between maybe 10 and 20,000 for the big matches in the stadium. So often not always full, some of these stadiums.
There's another question here, which is a good one. Which Vision 2030 projects do you see being delayed to after 2030, given the recent statement by the Minister of Finance? I think if you look at his statement, he does say that most of those projects are things that have not been announced yet. So I think that's one clue as to what things will be delayed. So if you're looking at a project that hasn't been officially announced yet, then that could possibly be something that's delayed. I think the big challenge for Saudi Arabia has been since the beginning of this year is how to phase the delivery of a lot of projects over the next decade. I think we've seen a few clues as to how that might happen. I think these, particularly the World Cup, but also the Expo, gives an opportunity to really just refocus what the priorities are. These are big global events with a lot of reputational risk involved. So if we look at Qatar, for example, in Qatar, there were several major schemes in Qatar which were put on the back burner as they focused on hosting the World Cup. The best example being Doha Bay Crossing or Shark Crossing. I think there's a possibility that Saudi Arabia takes a similar view and says, look, certain projects we're still committed to them, but we're just going to focus on delivering certain key events in the near future.
They've got no choice, have they? They've got to have these done by a certain time.
And I think the other interesting comments came from the Crown Prince in an interview where he said he was going to start looking at Vision 2040 that will be launched in 2027, 2028. And I think that you're going to see a little bit of more of the same, and it's going to be a long-term sort of ongoing development program rather than this sort of Vision 2030s, the hard stop. So good question. I think the easy answer is things that aren't announced yet are probably the most likely to be delayed. But I think a lot of the very large projects, it just becomes a question of phasing and what are the key priorities on the individual developments. Any update on wastewater infrastructure associated with these projects? No detail yet. However, there will be drainage. Ed mentioned stormwater drainage, and obviously there'll be the sewage networks and etc. etc. I was wondering if you'd be able to comment on how these giga projects will shape the steel industry more generally. I can pick that up. I think some of these buildings are iconic buildings. Obviously, stadiums and things use quite a lot of structural steel, which is used in the region, but not that extensively. It tends to be a concrete building market. So I think there's an opportunity for some very high-profile sort of steel structures going forward. So I think it will be positive for the steel industry. Do you want to pick up a couple there?
How can we participate in the projects or get in touch with the clients? Well, as far as we know yet, there is no procurement or tendering started for the Expo. In fact, as we said earlier, there's not necessarily a defined client yet, although the Royal Commission for Riyadh did oversee the bid. For the World Cup stadiums, then the Ministry of Sports is handling a number of them, 5 we saw earlier, and you can get in touch with them to participate. But then with the others under the PIF, the Giga Project Program, then one would need to register directly with each of the individual Giga Project clients, in this case, Neom, Qiddiya, and Jeddah Central. What are the key challenges likely to face contractors and suppliers to deliver these projects?
It depends on how you look at it, but I think the key challenge is time. And I can spin that the other way and say the key opportunity is time. I think contractors generally, or the industry generally, likes to work on things that have a set deadline. It means certain things like budget that tend to be a secondary concern, and the most important thing is delivery. So I think the main challenge is time, but it's also a great opportunity to work on projects that have to be delivered.
Are there enough materials, manpower, engineering capacity in the kingdom?
For these projects on their own, yes. I think that you then come into a question is if everything else is going on in the kingdom at the same time, you do start to see those things being stretched. If we take them off one by one, I think manpower is something that can probably be solved okay. Materials, yes, you can find materials. I think the issue will be A, finance, and B, sort of technical staff, managerial staff. I think that'll be two of the key problems.
And question here: what cities are going to be the primary areas for the World Cup? I assume Riyadh, Jeddah, and Dammam looks like in terms of the existing stadium infrastructure.
I would imagine Neom will be involved there as well. But I think it's really an opportunity. If you look at what Saudi Arabia is doing in terms of its tourism promotion, it's really trying to promote the kingdom as a diverse place with lots of different centres. So I think it will really be taken as an opportunity to put some stadiums in some of the more remote locations. Plus to share the event with people that don't live in those major cities as well. So I think yes, you'll have it in those major centres, but I think it's a great opportunity to spread the event around the kingdom.
Question here is about NEOM, but I think it can apply to most projects or government-related entities or government tenders generally. Is that there isn't enough information in public domain on tenders, pre-qualifiers, winning contractors, bidding contractors, etc. Where can someone get this data?
It's difficult. These are private companies. They're not really following the same processes that some of the more traditional government bodies do. I think they are getting better at communicating what their plans are, and I think that will improve with time. But one of the reasons these bodies are created is to get things done quickly, and they do that to an extent by not operating within the existing sort of government bureaucracy.
I mean, I think there is a move towards a little bit more transparency in the procurement process as competition heats up and it becomes more of a seller's market. But generally speaking, one needs to register and pre-qualify of each of the clients. In the Giga projects case, NEOM, Red Sea, for example, Qiddiya, you have to register with them independently. And then there is, for government procurement, there is a centralized system called Etimad. But again, the amount of information that's available tends to be quite low. So you do need to have feet and ears on the ground to be able to hear and know what's going on. Or of course, use projects databases like MEED projects to track all projects, and of course also MEED.com for related project information, background, news, and analysis. Will the World Cup potentially provide a boost for building metro systems and other transport systems in the other cities, which will host the stadiums, like I guess Dammam and Jeddah in particular?
Yeah, I think it definitely supports the development of transport infrastructure. Quite what that looks like, maybe it won't necessarily be a metro, or it could be, for example, a bus service, but definitely the transport is something that's really important. I mean, three things that you need to host a World Cup is accommodation. So there's going to be an awful lot of permanent hotels, but temporary accommodation that's established for the event. Transport, so whether that be railways, roads, buses, metros, etc., and also airports. And then the other one's security, just getting all the security. You've got an awful lot of people moving around attending large events. You need the security infrastructure there as well, which is everything from sort of CCTV to high security guards, processing buildings, and all those.
We mustn't forget that. That's very true as well. And as we saw in Doha, a lot of hotels were built in advance of the World Cup, so I expect there'll be a lot of hotel opportunities also in Dammam, for example, Riyadh and Jeddah.
And the opportunity to for buildings that could be used for accommodation for a short period of time, and they'll be repurposed quickly for some other usage.
Question here: do you think these two events will attract more tier 1 international contractors into the kingdom?
That's a really interesting question. Yes, I think it will. I think from experience in Qatar and Dubai, we've seen that what global events do is they attract companies that want to work on landmark events that look good on their portfolio. But also they introduce a much more stringent level of health and safety, worker welfare, quality of construction, all those things which attract international companies more, because they're no longer competing against run-of-the-mill companies in the market that would struggle to hit some of those KPIs.
Major experience in World Cups stadiums as well, of course, and expos. And of course, there's a lack of capacity also right now in terms of the contracting, especially as the market heats up. And final question, what about construction technologies? What role do they have to play in delivering some of these two events?
A big role. I think that Saudi Arabia has been very receptive to new ideas and doing things differently. I think there's an appreciation that construction could be improved. I think that will be the mindset today. My question is whether that remains the case when the time pressures start getting really pressing in a couple of years' time. Normally what will happen is that someone will say, just do it the way we normally do it. We know that it gets done. But at the moment, yes, there's a market where new ideas and things are very well received. Quite how long that's sustained for is a slightly different question.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Colin. I hope you all enjoyed the conversation we've had today and the presentation we provided. As I mentioned, of course, this is being recorded. We'll upload it to YouTube over the next few days. You'll be able to watch it in your own time. We'll send you a link to that. And of course, you should already have the presentation in your inboxes. Feel free to reach out to me or Colin anytime. You've got our details there. We're always happy to chat. And just leaves us to say thank you for your attention today. I see we had nearly 1,000 people with us, so huge interest in these two events and some of the project opportunities they provide, and well, all of the projects, frankly speaking, in Kingdom which we're going to see over the next few years. So thank you again for your attention, and we look forward to seeing you in the new year after what has been a record-breaking year this year in terms of project awards and activity. We've never had it so good in the region, and we'll hope that 2024 continues that trend. So just leaves us to say, have a very good end of year and festive season, and we'll see you all again for our next webinar in January. Thank you very much.